Close your eyes for just a second. Picture a British street in the 1970s or 80s, the smell of damp tarmac, the sound of an engine ticking over on a cold morning, and rows of cars you will simply never see again. Those machines weren't just vehicles. They were part of life, part of who we were as a nation. And today on Britain Rewind, we're bringing 10 of them back from the forgotten corners of British motoring history. 10 cars that once filled every driveway, every school run, every family road trip. And number 1 on this list? You genuinely will not see it coming. Subscribe to Britain Rewind right now, because this journey is only just getting started. Number 10. Austin Allegro. There's something about the Austin Allegro that makes older Brits smile and slowly shake their heads at the exact same time. Launched in 1973, this little car was meant to replace the beloved Mini on British roads. British Leyland had enormous hopes riding on it, and for a while, it was genuinely everywhere across the country. But here's what most people don't know. The Allegro was designed with a square steering wheel. Not a circle, a square. British Leyland called it the quartic wheel, and yes, it was every bit as bizarre as it sounds. The press absolutely tore it apart, and the buying public wasn't far behind them. Quality control issues piled up fast. By the early 1980s, the Allegro had quietly vanished from British roads, leaving behind nothing but a faint memory and a few rust spots. Do you remember seeing one as a child? The next car tells an even bigger story. Number 9. Morris Marina. If the Allegro had a direct rival in terms of British Leyland's greatest struggles, it was the Morris Marina. Released in 1971, this was meant to be Britain's no-nonsense, affordable family workhorse and a genuine answer to Ford and Vauxhall. And for a brief stretch, it actually worked. The Marina sold in serious numbers all across the country. Families loaded them up for seaside trips and parked them proudly on driveways the length and breadth of Britain. But here's where the story takes a real turn. Under that plain, functional body sat engineering technology that was already decades old at launch. The suspension was ancient, rust arrived quickly, and reliability was, to put it kindly, rather unpredictable. By the mid-80s, the Marina was gone and largely forgotten by everyone except those who lived with one. Was there a Marina parked on your street growing up? Drop that in the comments. Number 8 is coming, and this one had real, genuine potential that most people missed entirely. Number 8. Hillman Imp. Now here's one that most people completely forget, and honestly, that's a genuine shame worth talking about. The Hillman Imp landed on British roads in 1963 with a clear mission to rival the Mini and put affordable motoring within reach of even more British families. Built in Linwood, Scotland, it was a proud product of Britain's northern manufacturing spirit and ambition. And here's the detail that almost nobody ever mentions: the Imp used a rear-mounted aluminium engine. In 1963, that was genuinely advanced engineering for a budget car. It was light, lively, and on the right stretch of open road, an absolute pleasure to drive. But industrial strikes plagued the Linwood factory almost from the very start. Quality suffered badly, and chronic cooling problems became a recurring nightmare for owners everywhere. The car that had every right to be brilliant never quite fulfilled its remarkable promise. Most people have completely forgotten it existed, but if your family owned one, you absolutely haven't. Number 7. Vauxhall Chevet. Not every forgotten British car came from British Leyland, and this next one proves that point perfectly. The Vauxhall Chevet arrived in 1975 and quietly became one of the most common sights on British roads almost overnight. Affordable, practical, and utterly unremarkable on the surface, and somehow, that was precisely what millions of British families actually needed at the time. But here's what most people don't know about the humble Chevet: beneath that ordinary hatchback exterior, there was a high-performance rally version called the HS that most owners never knew existed. And this is where the story genuinely takes a turn. The Chevet HS became a serious international rally weapon in the late 70s, competing at the very highest levels of the sport. Meanwhile, the everyday Chevet just quietly kept ferrying British families around without any drama whatsoever. By the late 1980s it had vanished completely, barely leaving a trace behind. Was this part of your childhood? Number 6 had real class, and you'll want to hear this. Number 6. Triumph Doomite. Now we're stepping up a level, and this is where the list gets genuinely interesting. The Triumph Dolomite is a name that once carried real prestige and admiration on British roads. Produced throughout the 1970s, it was positioned as a sophisticated, sporty saloon for the discerning British driver, a proper cut above the ordinary. But here's the detail that should have made this car legendary forever. The Triumph Dolomite Sprint was actually the first production car in the entire world to use a 16-valve cylinder head. That is not a small thing. A British car. First in the world. That single engineering achievement alone should have secured its place in history permanently. Instead, British Leyland's ongoing industrial decline dragged the Dolomite down with everything else it touched. Poor build quality undermined a genuinely brilliant concept, and by 1980, it was gone. Very few survive today, which makes each one something special. Do you remember this one from the road? Number 5, Rover SD1. This one genuinely deserves far more recognition than history ever gave it, and that's a story worth telling properly. The Rover SD1 appeared in 1976 and immediately turned heads the length of Britain. It won European Car of the Year in 1977, not a small achievement for any manufacturer anywhere. With its sweeping, fastback styling clearly influenced by Italian design thinking, this was something boldly different from British Leyland. It looked expensive, it felt ambitious, and for one brief shining moment, it made Britain genuinely proud of its car industry again. But here's what happened next: catastrophic build quality let it down at every turn. Electrical problems, rust appearing within months of purchase, and alarming reliability failures became its notorious reputation. The car that should have restored Britain's automotive standing instead became another painful symbol of industrial decline. Deeply sad, because underneath all those problems was a truly great car trying to escape. Most people have completely forgotten the SD1 exists. Number 4 is next, and it's a proper slice of everyday British family life that you'll know well. Number 4, Austin Maxi. The Austin Maxi doesn't get talked about nearly enough, and that's a real injustice to a car that was actually ahead of its time. Launched in 1969, this was genuinely revolutionary British family engineering. It was the first British car ever offered with a 5-door hatchback layout and a fully reclining interior that folded completely flat into a makeshift sleeping area on long journeys. In theory, this was brilliant, practical, affordable British family motoring at its finest. Families loved taking these on camping trips, and the space was genuinely impressive for its era. But here's where things went seriously wrong: the gear change mechanism was notoriously dreadful from day one. Owners described it as trying to stir a pot of thick soup while driving at speed down a motorway. It became a national joke almost immediately after launch. Rust issues compounded the problems further. By the 1980s, the Maxi had quietly faded away, its clever ideas going largely uncredited by the industry it quietly influenced. Does anyone remember that gear stick? The next car is one most people completely overlook despite seeing them absolutely everywhere. Number 3, Talbot Horizon. The Talbot Horizon is one of those cars that existed in genuinely vast numbers across Britain and then simply disappeared as if someone had quietly erased it from the national memory overnight. Produced from 1978, this was a collaborative European effort built across Britain and France, sold under a brand name that was itself rapidly dying in the marketplace. And here's what's genuinely interesting: the Horizon was actually well regarded by motoring journalists when it first launched. It handled decently, offered solid interior space, and felt refreshingly modern compared to much of the British competition at the time. But the Talbot name was fighting a losing commercial battle nobody could win. Chrysler had sold its entire European operation to Peugeot, and the subsequent rebrand to Talbot confused British buyers enormously and fatally. By the mid-1980s, the Talbot brand was finished, and the Horizon disappeared quietly with it. Completely forgotten today, yet millions of British families drove one regularly. Does this name bring anything back for you? And then something unexpected is coming with number 2, genuinely overlooked, genuinely brilliant, and genuinely British in every possible way. Number 2, Vauxhall Cavalere. If you grew up anywhere in Britain during the 1980s, the Vauxhall Cavalere was simply everywhere you looked. Company car parks were absolutely packed with them. Family driveways, supermarket car parks, school pickup lines, the Cavalier didn't just populate British roads, it defined an entire decade of ordinary British life. It was competent, comfortable, and thoroughly practical without asking anything complicated of its driver. For a whole generation of British families, a Cavalier was simply what a car looked like. But here's what most people don't realize about this everyday icon. The Cavalier was one of the most stolen cars in all of Britain throughout the 1980s and into the early 1990s. Thieves targeted them relentlessly because they were so common, so recognizable, and relatively straightforward to steal. Thousands vanished from British streets every single year. And then, almost overnight, the Cavalier itself vanished, replaced by the Vectra, which never captured anything close to the same warmth or affection from the British public. A good Cavalier today is a genuinely rare sight. Was it your family's car? Number 1 is right here, and this one is truly, completely unexpected. Number 1, Reliant Robin. And here we are at number 1. The car most people either laugh at immediately or overlook entirely, and yet no vehicle in British motoring history tells the story of this nation's character quite like the Reliant Robin. This three-wheeled, fiberglass wonder from Tamworth, Staffordshire was genuinely practical transport for tens of thousands of ordinary British people across several decades. Because here's the thing nobody ever stops long enough to consider, you could legally drive a Reliant Robin on a motorcycle license alone. No full car license required, no expensive testing process. For people who couldn't afford the full licensing journey, this car represented real, meaningful, hard-won independence. Nearly 100,000 were sold right across Britain. It became a genuine working-class icon in its own quiet way. And beyond every joke and every tipping story you've heard, the Robin represents something deeply moving about the British spirit, the absolute determination to get moving, whatever the obstacles. That is why it sits at number 1 on Britain Rewind today. Do you remember seeing one? Tell us your Robin story below. And there you have it, 10 forgotten British cars that once defined the streets, driveways, and daily rhythms of this remarkable nation. These were never just machines. They were mornings rushing to school, summer holidays packed into tiny boots, and Sunday afternoons spent under bonnets that never quite cooperated with any plan. Britain's automotive story is full of genuine brilliance, stubborn determination, and real heart, often packed into the very same car. If any of these brought back a memory, please share it in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed to Britain Rewind yet, now is the perfect time. Britain's story is far from finished. See you in the next one.